what we're going to be considering. Nick Spalding started all this, and so I decided to do a series. Nick started it, and I'm going to try to finish it and carry it on. A number of years ago, we were up in Texas doing some principal training, and we went to a Church of Christ that Sunday, but that Wednesday the bus was to take us to a Baptist church. I says, oh boy, I've got to go to a Baptist church on Wednesday night. See what happens. And the Baptist preacher preached a sermon. I says, man, that thing's worth re-preaching. And I like the outline, and I've used it over and over again. I've shared it, and it just was such a great message that I want to share it with you this morning. It's interesting about Job and all the problems he went through. Do you remember when Nick was talking about Alexander, the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day?
Yeah.
And that kind of wakened us up as far as, man, have you ever had some of those terrible, horrible, no good, very bad days? And I was teasing Trudy the other day. I said, you sound like a sister to Job, going through some of the aggravations she's been through. And you talk to Sylvia, and she has her own aggravations. And Glenn's got his share, and Sharon's got her share. And then, of course, Marvin and Clarice, they never have terrible, horrible, no good, very bad days. And the Mikowski family, they're an exception. They have the absolutely perfect. They never have terrible, horrible, no good. Jeff, how's yours? Did you have a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day? And Jeff says, yep, another one of them. Well, what happened is the kid fell down and he got bullied on and all this other stuff. And then another time that he went to lunch, and guess who ended up with desserts? The girl had a dessert, and the guy had a dessert, but his mama forgot to pack him a dessert, so he had a very bad, awful, terrible, very bad day.
I did fall apart.
And then, of course, when I went to bed, Nick took back the pillow. He said I would keep a Mickey Mouse nightlight burned out, and I bit my tongue. And the cat wants to sleep with Anthony and not with me. It's been a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. My mom says some days are like that. And this is based on a true story, just like we had the true story of this poor kid and all his horrible experiences. We're going to turn over to the book of Job and read a story about this man who was a wealthy cattle baron. It's kind of interesting in Texas. You know how these Texas guys like to brag about how wealthy they are. And one guy was bragging, yeah, I got 200,000 acres of land out there outside of Houston. And another guy says, well, I got 300,000 acres outside of Dallas. Well, what about you? And this old cowpoke said, well, I only own, 200 acres. 200 acres? Yep. Downtown Dallas. All its high rises. Yeah, I think he had all the wealth. You could look at Job, and we're going to read that, Job chapter 1. It said, in the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 cattle, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys. And he had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the east. He owned 11,000 head of cattle. Pretty big ranch. It's kind of interesting that these guys were introducing this guy. As far as, I'd like to introduce you to Sam Jones. He's out of Texas, and he made $17 million in wheat. And the guy got up there and says, he made a few mistakes. My name's not Sam Jones, it's Dewey Long. And it wasn't Texas, it was Oklahoma. And it wasn't 17 million, it was 25 million. And it wasn't wheat, it was oil. And I didn't make it, I lost it. And here we have Job. He lost it all. Verse 4. His sons used to take turns holding feasts in their homes, And they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would send and have them purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God. In their hearts, this was Job's regular custom. In verse 8, it says, one day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? And Satan answered the Lord, from roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it. Verse 8, then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and an upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you not put a hedge or wall around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and his herds are spread throughout the land. But stretch forth your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, everything he has is in your hands, but on his man himself do not lay a finger. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord, and one day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell upon the sky from the sky and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am only the one who has escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the Chaldeans formed their raiding parties and swept down on your camels and carried them off. They put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one left to escape to tell you. While he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, your sons and your daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead. And I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. At this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship. He said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord will take away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Wow. You think Alexander had a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day? Job had worse than a horrible, terrible, no good, very bad day. He had just tragedy after tragedy after tragedy after tragedy come smashing down on him. And you figure, enough is enough is enough is enough. And of course, Job was one of the patriarchs of old. And in his lifestyle, he's a righteous man. He not only was a person who prayed for he and his wife, but he also prayed for his children. He offered sacrifice. He was back before the days of the Moses Law and the 10 Commandments. He was where the patriarch of where the fathers of each family oversaw the spiritual worship and the spiritual life of the family. So Job actually goes back into the days of Genesis, back in the days before all the Moses covenant and the Christian covenant. He had the old patriarchal covenant where God spoke to each father of each house. And among those patriarchs, and he was the one that was a spiritual head of his family. But here we have Job losing his possessions through theft and violence. He lost over 11,000 head of camel. Now, I've titled this sermon, What Would It Take to Get You to Quit Serving God? What do you have to lose to turn your back on God? Because I've known we were at a rally one time and somebody got a phone call and says, bad news, your house burnt to the ground. You need to get back to Kansas quick. And they went back and the house was gone. One of our professors, same thing. He was teaching there in the college in Jamaica, and his house caught fire and burnt. And of course folk come up and says, well, Brother Gene was a cowboy. He used to go out after feral loose cattle. He'd lasso them, bring them into market, sell the cattle, that raises money so he'd go to the mission field, teach in Jamaica. He always carried a switchblade knife on him, because if for any reason that cow would turn on him, he'd pull out that switchblade and cut the lasso if he had to. It was between him and a broken leg and the cow he was trying to wrestle down. He lost his house, burnt to the ground. Now, Job lost more than just his house burned to the ground. He lost his cattle. He lost his possessions. He lost his goods. And I've known people to have a loss of either wrecking a car, and they use that as an excuse: just because I wrecked my car, I'm going to quit serving God because I got involved in a wreck. There's got to be more to that than that. We were in Iowa, and this one husband would not allow his wife to go to church. And he'd take the keys away from her. They only had one car, lived on a farm. Until such a day as his hired hand stopped his car, went in the drugstore, gave himself a pack of cigarettes. While he was in the drugstore getting that pack of cigarettes, another car sideswiped, killed the guy's wife and kids that were in that car. So, and whenever that happened, it gave the old farmer wake-up call: I'm not going to forbid my wife going to church anymore. It gave him a real deliberate wake-up call. But here we have Job. There's 11,000 head. And all the devil sits back and chortles and says, aha, I got him. And I remember Preacher Tom over there in Zephyr Christian Church always says, the stuff of this world is just stuff. Your possessions are just stuff. It's just more stuff. When people escaped Cuba and came to America, they often escaped with just the clothes on their back. You folks probably know Lydia Groff there at the Legacy Church. Her daddy was a Methodist preacher. Whenever communism took over Cuba, they escaped with just the clothes on their back and whatever they can do on a little carry-on, and that was it. They came here with practically nothing. Had to start life all over again. And here Job lost his herds. He started doing a herd count. The sheep, as far as being part of the possessions, the cattle barons and the sheep herders never did get along with each other. And there's a reason why these two never got along with each other. The sheep had a tendency to overgraze. Whenever the sheep, they'd eat the grass right down to a nub, almost down to the roots. And it didn't leave the cows anything. Now the cows could go in and graze a field, and the sheep could come in right after the cows, and they could graze right after the cows, no problem. But the cows could never graze right after the sheep. It just was a matter that those sheep would nibble those things down where the cows couldn't even get a tooth on the blade of grass. The cattle wealth, and usually it's known about how things are measured and how your wealth is measured. And a lot of times when nosy, I asked some rancher one time how many head of cattle you had, and they told me it was none of my business. Because you can take how many head of cattle they have times a certain amount, I don't know if it was $500 or $2,000, whatever, and you can figure out how much this person was worth. And that's why they said, none of your business. 11,000 head of cattle. Camels. How much is a camel worth? I had an Arab tell me he would trade, how many, Sandy? 2 camels or 5? And he said, you're too skinny. When I said, no, she's worth 100 camels. He said, she's too skinny for 100 camels. But you look at a camel just to rent for a month is like $5,000 a camel. And you think of, okay, if a camel rents for $5,000 a camel, what's a camel worth today? And you know, as far as the cost of beef and hamburger, let alone steak, you know how much a cow's worth. And you're looking at all the other, as far as mutton and wool and the output of wool from the sheep, and then whenever he's past wool and you slaughter the sheep, there's an incredible value. Not only did Job lose his cattle, but he lost his other possessions through natural disaster. I remember some of the tragedies came through Haiti, and right before that huge earthquake, there's the hurricanes. The 3 hurricanes that hit Florida decimated and hurt Florida pretty badly. It hurt Florida so bad. I was talking to the preacher down the Arcadia Christian Church, and he had his church cut in half. They were running about 120, cut them down to about 60 people. The Northerners got so scared of Florida, they just packed up and left. They got in their campers and moved. They sold their houses. They said, we're buying campers, so in case any other bad weather comes, we're getting out of Dodge. Now I remember cleaning up after Hurricane 1 and cleaning up the office after Hurricane 2, and we peeled back the carpet and replaced it the first time. Then second hurricane, we ended up with a wet office, and we had to peel it back and blow fans under it to kind of dry it out. Then when the third hurricane came, we came back to the shop, and I saw the welcome mat blown halfway across the yard, clean to the woods, and I put it back in. I called the foreman, Larry, and says, Larry, me and the wife are headed to Ohio for a missionary convention. We're going to be gone for about a week. It's all yours. Clean her up. We cleaned up the last 2 messes. And my other coworker, Stan Diakon, he was over in Oklahoma. He used to run a ranch or farm over in Oklahoma. 2 major losses during this time. I'm going to share with you Stan's loss. I'm going to share with you a loss in Haiti. While we were going through what we were going through and saying, okay, only thing I lost on my roof was one little shingle tab about that big. I had it roofed about a year before the hurricane. Didn't lose anything. 3 hurricanes later. But I got a call from a fellow by the name of Salonik Adolphe, one of our Haitian guys. I was going to have him come down to Jamaica and teach. And he was in a village above Port-au-Prince called Genevieve. In Genevieve, the hurricanes that hit Florida hit them first. And as the hurricanes came through, the water came cascading off the mountainside through the village. And it hit their houses with a tidal wave of mud. He had mud cleaning up to the windowsills in his entire house. And you imagine this building cleaning up waist-high in mud. You imagine the furniture in this building, if we're waist-high in mud. He, his wife, and his 2 kids are up on the rooftop during that whole hurricane, clinging together. And whenever the storm dissipated, the only thing they had was each other and the 2 kids. Everything they had was washed away or covered with a thick coat of waist-deep mud. Lost everything. Everything. Well, that's Haiti. That's not here. Meanwhile, my friend Stan Diakon, who was a co-worker there at the monument business, he worked hard on the farm. It was a $1 million plus farm. But his brothers got the parent to sign a paper to give them power of attorney and possession of the farm. Those kids did absolutely nothing. Nothing to farm the farm. He did all the work. And he thought by right of doing all the work, he should be the one inheriting the farm. And guess who ended up inheriting the farm when the parent died? The brother that got him to sign them the power of attorney and gave them power over the entire property. Stan ended up with nothing. $1.5 million or better ranch, farm in Oklahoma. He lost everything. Did all the work, had nothing to show for it. I get this call in the monument business. The guy called me up. My wife sends out letters or sent out letters back in our working days. And it was a brochure and a letter if you needed a headstone because your wife died. Well, this guy calls me up and just chews my ear out. You have no business. I'm not going to put a marker on my wife's grave, and if anyone wants to do it, the daughter, my stepdaughter can put a marker on her grave, but I forbid her to put a marker on her grave. This is what happened. While his wife was working as his secretary at his multi-million-dollar business, she was turning all the paperwork and all the possessions and all the company assets over to her daughter, which was his stepdaughter, not adopted. And when she died, he had $963 left in the bank. Nothing. He was so furious, he forbid me to put a stone on his wife's grave. He didn't realize I'm not going to put a stone on her grave unless you pay me anyway, because we're in business to make a few dollars, George. But at the same time, even though he says she could not have her grave, there is called the right of sepulture. And the right of sepulture means everybody. I don't care if your name's Al Capone or if you're a serial killer. I don't care if your name is Charles Manson. There is a law on the books that everybody has a right to a burial and a headstone. It's part of the law of this land. It's called the right of sepulcher or sepulture. But I didn't want to argue with a guy who was mad enough already that, you know, you're going against the law trying to refuse your wife who gave all your assets and goods to her daughter. But again, Sharon, it's just stuff. Whether it's a ranch out there in Oklahoma, I could care less for having $1.5 million ranch out there in the middle of Oklahoma. Florida, Lakeland's my home. What would I do with $1.5 million ranch? It's just one more headache to rent out to tenants, Trudy, and let them tear it up and steal your refrigerator or your stove. Right? Yeah. It's just one more headache. And then this man who lost all his possessions and goods. Every time somebody wins the lottery, you know, they live happily ever after. You know, the wife divorces them, and somebody shoots them, kills them, buries them underneath somebody's back porch with a layer of concrete over your head, like they did that guy by the name of Shakespeare. It's stuff. Chapter 1, verse 18 and 19. This is probably one of the saddest states. It says, while he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck from the corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. And Job tore his robe, shaved his head, and said, naked I came in from my mother's womb, my mother's womb, and naked I'm going to return to. Job lost his children, put all 10 of them in the same grave. How many here have ever lost a child? Some don't know the story about Todd and Lorelei Ellis. They're not here, I'll tell you this story. She buried 2 children before her other 2 girls were born. I remember they had a special memorial service for one of the babies that was stillborn. The other baby, it was miscarriage. I know my mom, she lost one between me and my brother. And if the one that she lost between me and my brother was full term, I would have never been born. And I've told that story to others that have lost and stillborns between us. As if the stillborn had lived, I'd never been here, I'd never been around. But I've known people lose a child and curse God. They really just blame God on everything. In Pennsylvania, in the Christian day school, we had this boy by the name of Joey Cormus, crippled kid. And the parents would send him to the Christian school. We had a small school in the rural Pennsylvania coal mining community. And Joey couldn't play sports. And eventually he got so where his crutches, he had these little polio kind of crutches, these metal crutches that would kind of support here, and they had these handles. They weren't under the arm crutches, they were kind of wrist and forearm kind of crutches. And the first year, you saw his back start leaning back. What was it, muscular dystrophy he had, MD? And we made him goalie, as far as whenever we played soccer, he was goalie. And then pretty soon he got so crippled up that the next year he became scorekeeper. And this rich kid, John Butcher, would race his wheelchair back and forth across the parking lot, up and down the sidewalk. And Mrs. Blaney would come in. She was a reading teacher, but she, John Butcher, you're going to wreck that guy's wheelchair. You put that wheelchair up right now. Those parents paid very good money. So I called John into the principal's office and says, John, am I in trouble? He said, no. Mrs. Blaney's awful mad at me. Am I in trouble? No. I says, she comes in and teaches reading, what was it, Thursdays? So when she comes in and teaches reading on Thursdays, you don't race the wheelchair up and down these sidewalks. Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesday morning, she comes for staff meeting Wednesday afternoon, and Fridays. You can do all the racing you want. And we built this handicap ramp for him, and John would take him to the top of that handicap ramp and shoot him across the church parking lot off that handicap ramp. It's the only fun that kid had. But then the boy died. He's 12, 13 years old. And our kids were his pallbearers. We had the funeral service, and I remember when Herod, the funeral director there in Point Marion, came up, he called me up and says, I can't get enough help. I'm kind of concerned. I'm going to be driving over the hearse to bring the casket there into it was the Oak Grove Church of Christ Christian Church that was there in Lakeland, Pennsylvania. We're going to have to make room. Do we have a way we can, extra help, we can get them up there? I said, we've got a handicap. Oh, that's good. We can roll that casket right up in there. I said, the irony of it all is we built that handicap ramp for him so we can get his wheelchair up into the chapel so he can be in chapel with us. And now that same handicap ramp that we built for him was now being used for his casket, to roll his casket there into the church place so I could have his funeral. And then our kids buried him over there. They were his pallbearers. We buried him in Smithfield, Pennsylvania cemetery right there behind the old Baptist church. I remember Sandy and I just not too many months ago went up there to visit his grave. But when he died, his mother was of a religious faith. She was expecting a miracle, and God was going to answer prayer, and this boy was going to walk again. Dad had nothing to do with church. He stayed home. Mama went to church, and Mama prayed. Mama read the Bible and all that other stuff. But when that boy died, the mother lost her entire faith. She didn't get the miracle she thought. She wanted her boy to walk. She wanted her boy to be healed. She wanted her boy to be an answer to her prayer. And her prayer wanted the presence of him. And how do you tell her that he is walking now? Now, he did throw his crutches away. He doesn't need that stupid wheelchair anymore. You don't need John Butcher racing that thing back and forth across because he's running himself, because he's got 2 new legs. The father became the spiritual leader in the family, and the wife became more dependent on her husband's faith now. But in losing that son, she lost all the faith she had. And that was just one son. What would have been if she had lost 10 kids in the same grave? What would it take to get you to quit serving God? Losing your animals, your herd, your possessions, losing your house to natural disaster, losing your possessions to thieves, brigands, and vandalism, losing your children.
You got to be stubborn. Not too stubborn.
You know, the Bible told us in Luke 13, 1-4, he talks about this Tower of Siloam. And let's turn in final thoughts this morning to Luke chapter 13. Book of Luke 13. You know, every time I'd crack my head when I was 10 years old, 11 years old, Mama said God was punishing me. Anytime I'd bark my shin bone, Mom says God is punishing me. Did your parent ever do that? I mean, that's wrong theology, but that's the theology we got, you know, when I was a kid growing up. Every time something dumb happened to you, it wasn't you're stupid and you're clumsy. And then whenever you're growing, you overreach yourself, because when you're growing, you think my arm's this long and it's that long, and you knock over a glass of milk. And the kids aren't really doing it deliberately. It's just that their brain says that that arm is 18 inches long, and actually that arm's 20 inches long, and you overreach and you knock something over because your brain hadn't caught up with the rest of you. And the parents don't realize too that whenever you're going through a growing spurt, that your brain takes sabbatical. Your academics go down because your body is so busy growing that your brain's not keeping up with it, so you're slower in school. Not because you're a goof off, not because you're stupid, it's your body's growing 6 inches that summer, and your brain hadn't caught up with it yet. How do you explain that to parents who say, my kid's not on the honor roll this 6 weeks? Luke 13 says, Now there were some present at the time who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices. Jesus answered, Do you think that these Galileans were worse sinners than all the other Galileans because they suffered this way? I tell you no, but unless you repent, you too all will perish. Or those 18 who died when the Tower of Siloam fell on them, do you think that they were more guilty than all the others living in Jerusalem? I tell you no, but unless you repent, you too will also perish. 18 people were killed in a tower crash. The guy fell off a scaffolding building the electric tower, or the electric down here at the electric plant, doing that coal burning tower. And they said, well, the guy was a sinner, he died. No. Jesus said just because these 18 people died in a tragedy, it doesn't mean God was punishing them. It's wrong theology. He says, but so what about those 18 people that died? So what about these Galileans who Pilate killed in his slaughter? Except you repent, you're going to likewise perish. He brought that right down to something personal. 10 children die, you bury them in one grave like Job. Horrible tragedy. But Jesus said, except you repent, you shall likewise perish. This is part of a series to be continued next month on those horrible, miserable, terrible days in the life of Job. But what would it take to get you to quit serving God? What would it have the faith and the patience of Job?